The Senate Budget Committee hearing room was buzzing with anticipation, but not because of the usual parade of policy wonks and lobbyists. Today, the spotlight was on two lawmakers who couldn't have been more different in style or substance. Senator John Fetterman, the towering Pennsylvanian in his signature Carhartt hoodie, had built his brand on being the voice of the working class. A straight-talker who claimed to cut through the noise of Washington with plain language and a no-nonsense attitude. His supporters saw him as a breath of fresh air, a man who understood the struggles of ordinary Americans. His critics, however, accused him of playing up his everyman image, while quietly echoing the talking points of big business and fossil fuel interests across the aisle. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett was ready. She had arrived with a thick folder of research, her reputation for sharp questioning and relentless preparation preceding her. Crockett, a former civil rights attorney and rising star in the House, was known for her ability to turn a hearing into a masterclass in policy and persuasion. She didn't care for theatrics, her power came from facts, clarity, and a refusal to let anyone, no matter how popular or powerful, get away with lazy arguments. The hearing was called to review the administration's climate and infrastructure proposals, a topic that had become a political minefield. The country was facing a crossroads: invest boldly in climate adaptation and infrastructure, or stick to the old playbook of patchwork repairs and incremental change. Fetterman, who had made headlines for questioning the scale and speed of federal climate spending, was expected to challenge the wisdom of pouring billions into green initiatives when, as he put it, Pennsylvania's bridges are falling down and working families can't wait for the future. As the session began, Fetterman wasted no time. He leaned into his microphone, his voice booming through the chamber. "Congresswoman Crockett, I appreciate your passion for climate action. But let's get real. My state has thousands of structurally deficient bridges, crumbling roads, and water systems that are decades out of date. You want to spend billions on climate programs. Are you telling the people of Pennsylvania they have to wait for basic repairs while Washington chases green dreams?" A few senators nodded, sensing an easy win for Fetterman. The narrative was familiar: climate action versus working-class needs, the future versus the present, idealism versus practicality. But Crockett didn't flinch. She opened her folder, glanced at her notes, and looked Fetterman squarely in the eye. "Senator, I'm glad you brought up Pennsylvania's infrastructure. Because the truth is, climate change isn't some distant threat. It's already here, and it's already costing your state billions. Let's talk about those bridges and roads. Do you know what's been washing them out, buckling pavement and overwhelming your water systems? It's not just age. It's extreme weather, floods, heat waves, storms that are stronger and more frequent than ever before. And every time we rebuild the same way, without accounting for the new climate reality, we're wasting taxpayer money and setting up working families for more disruption." Fetterman tried to interject, but Crockett pressed on. "You say climate spending is a luxury. I say it's the only way to protect the investments we're already making. If we don't build infrastructure that can withstand the climate of today and tomorrow, we're just throwing good money after bad. And the people who pay the highest price when roads collapse or water systems fail, it's not the lobbyists or the CEOs. It's the working families you say you represent." The room grew quiet. Crockett's words cut through the usual partisan noise, reframing the debate in a way that was both urgent and undeniable. She reached for a stack of reports. "Let's look at the data. In the last 5 years, Pennsylvania has seen record flooding that's destroyed roads and bridges, costing the state over $2 billion in emergency repairs. Heat waves have warped pavement and strained electrical grids. And the communities hit hardest are the ones with the least resources to recover: rural towns, low-income neighborhoods, places where a closed bridge means an extra hour to get to work or school." Fetterman shifted in his seat, but Crockett wasn't finished. "You talk about jobs? Well, climate-resilient infrastructure creates more jobs per dollar than traditional repairs. Upgrading roads, bridges, and water systems to withstand extreme weather means more work for construction crews, engineers, and skilled trades. It means safer communities and a stronger economy. The idea that we have to choose between fixing what's broken and preparing for what's coming is a false choice. a narrative pushed by the same fossil fuel interests that want to keep us stuck in the past. A murmur ran through the audience. Crockett's argument was clear, direct, and impossible to dismiss. She wasn't just defending climate spending, she was exposing the flaws in Fetterman's entire framing. The senator, sensing he was losing the narrative, tried to pivot. "I'm not against climate action," Fetterman said, his tone defensive. "But we have to be realistic about what we can afford. There's only so much money to go around." Crockett nodded. "And that's exactly why we can't afford to keep making the same mistakes. Every dollar we spend rebuilding infrastructure the old way is a dollar we'll have to spend again when the next storm hits. Investing in climate adaptation isn't just good policy, it's fiscal responsibility. If you're worried about the budget, you should be the first to demand that every bridge, every road, every water system is built to last." The hearing room was silent. The usual back and forth replaced by a sense that something important had just happened. Crockett had taken Fetterman's challenge and turned it inside out, showing that the real choice wasn't between climate action and working-class needs, but between smart investment endless, expensive failure. The committee chair, sensing the shift in the room, gave Crockett the floor. She didn't waste a second. "Let's talk about who really pays the price when we ignore climate adaptation," she said, her voice steady but rising with conviction. "It's not the politicians in Washington. It's the families in Johnstown who lose their homes to flooding. It's the workers in Pittsburgh who can't get to their jobs because a bridge is out. It's the small business owners in Scranton who watch their inventory float away after a storm. These aren't hypotheticals, Senator. These are real people, and they're tired of being told to wait for help that never comes." She flipped to a chart showing the economic impact of recent climate disasters in Pennsylvania. In 2022 alone, extreme weather caused over $800 million in infrastructure damage in your state. That's not a future problem. That's now. And the cost of doing nothing is only going up. Every year we delay, the repairs get more expensive. The disruptions get worse, and the burden falls hardest on those with the least. Fetterman tried to regain control. "But Congresswoman, you're talking about long-term investments. My constituents need help today. They need roads fixed, water systems upgraded, jobs created now, not in 10 years. Crockett nodded, acknowledging the urgency. "And that's exactly why climate adaptation is the answer. When we rebuild after a disaster, we have a choice. Do we patch things up the old way, or do we build back stronger? Every time we choose the old way, we guarantee another failure. But when we invest in resilient infrastructure, we create jobs immediately. Engineers, construction workers, electricians, planners. These are good, union jobs that can't be outsourced. And we protect communities from the next disaster, saving money and lives." She turned to the expert witnesses at the table. "Dr. Patel, you've studied the job impact of climate-resilient infrastructure. What happens when we invest in adaptation versus traditional repairs?" Dr. Patel, a labor economist, responded, "The data is clear. Every $1 billion spent on climate-resilient infrastructure creates up to 13,000 jobs, more than traditional projects. And these jobs are spread across urban and rural areas, benefiting the very communities that are most vulnerable to climate impacts." Crockett looked back at Fetterman. "So when you say you're standing up for working families?" "Senator, I have to ask, are you standing up for the jobs of the future? Or are you defending a status quo that keeps people stuck in a cycle of disaster and repair?" The senator bristled. "I'm defending the people who can't afford to wait for Washington to get its act together." Crockett's reply was swift. "And I'm defending the people who can't afford to lose everything every time a storm hits. The people who can't afford higher insurance premiums, lost wages, or the cost of rebuilding their lives from scratch. If we really care about working families, we have to stop pretending that climate action is a luxury. It's a necessity." The room was silent again, the weight of her words settling over the committee. Even some of Fetterman's usual allies looked uncertain. Crockett pressed her advantage, turning to the fiscal argument. "Let's talk about the budget," she said. "You say we can't afford climate adaptation, but the truth is we can't afford not to. Every dollar spent on resilient infrastructure saves up to $6 in avoided disaster costs. That's not my opinion. That's the conclusion of the National Institute of Building Sciences. If you're serious about fiscal responsibility, you should be demanding more investment in climate adaptation, not less. She held up a report. Pennsylvania has already spent billions on emergency repairs after floods, storms, and heat waves. That's money that could have gone to schools, healthcare, or tax relief. Instead, it's being spent over and over to fix the same problems because we refuse to address the root cause. Fetterman, now visibly frustrated, tried to pivot. But what about the energy transition? You want to move away from coal and gas, but those industries support thousands of jobs in my state. Are you telling those workers they're just out of luck? Crockett shook her head. No, Senator. I'm telling them they deserve better. They deserve a plan for the future, not empty promises about jobs that are disappearing anyway. The clean energy transition is happening with or without us. The question is whether we're going to lead it and create new opportunities or let Pennsylvania get left behind. Investing in climate-resilient infrastructure means retraining workers, supporting new industries, and making sure no one is left out. She paused, letting the point sink in. The real threat to Pennsylvania workers isn't climate action. It's the refusal to act. It's the politicians who tell them to be afraid of change instead of preparing them for it. A senator from another state, clearly impressed, asked Crockett to elaborate. How do you ensure that the benefits of these investments reach the communities that need them most? Crockett answered without hesitation. By targeting resources to the hardest-hit areas, prioritizing local hiring, and making sure that contracts go to small businesses and minority-owned firms. By listening to the people on the ground, not just the lobbyists in Washington. And by holding ourselves accountable for results, not just promises. The hearing was no longer about Fetterman's challenge. It was about Crockett's vision, a vision rooted in data, compassion, and a clear-eyed understanding of what working families actually need. The committee, the audience, and even the press could feel the momentum shift as the hearing continued. The ripple effects of Crockett's testimony became impossible to ignore. Reporters in the back row exchanged glances, already drafting headlines about the moment a House member from Texas had reframed the entire debate on climate and infrastructure. Even some of the most seasoned committee members found themselves taking notes, realizing that Crockett wasn't just answering Fetterman. She was setting a new standard for what it meant to advocate for working families in the era of climate change. Fetterman, sensing the ground shifting beneath him, tried to regain his footing. Congresswoman, I appreciate your passion, but you have to understand, people in my state are skeptical. They've heard a lot of promises from Washington before. They want to know that these investments will actually make a difference in their lives, not just in some report or press release. Crockett nodded, acknowledging the skepticism. That's a fair concern, Senator. And it's why transparency and accountability have to be at the heart of any infrastructure plan. We need to show people exactly where the money is going, what projects are being funded, and how those projects will make their communities safer and more prosperous. That means regular progress reports, independent audits, and real consequences for contractors who cut corners or fail to deliver. She leaned in, her tone both empathetic and firm. But let's also be honest about what's at stake. The cost of inaction isn't just measured in dollars. It's measured in lives disrupted, businesses lost, and communities left behind. When a bridge collapses or a water system fails, it's not a headline for a day. It's a crisis that can set a family back for years. We owe it to the people we serve to do better. A Republican senator, perhaps hoping to catch Crockett off guard, asked, "What about inflation? Isn't all this new spending just going to drive up prices and hurt the very people you say you want to help?" Crockett was ready. Inflation is a real concern, but the biggest driver of rising costs for working families isn't federal investment. It's the cost of disasters, supply chain disruptions, and lost productivity when infrastructure fails. When we invest in resilience, we stabilize communities and economies. We reduce the risk of catastrophic losses that force prices up for everyone. And by creating good jobs, we put more money in people's pockets, which helps families keep up with rising costs. She turned the question back to the committee. If we're serious about fighting inflation, we should be investing in the things that make our economy stronger and more secure, not cutting corners and hoping for the best. Fetterman, now clearly on the defensive, tried to return to familiar ground. You keep talking about climate adaptation, but what about the people who feel left out of the conversation? The rural communities, the small towns that don't see themselves in these big federal programs? Crockett's answer was direct. Those are exactly the communities that need our help the most. Rural areas are often the hardest hit by infrastructure failures and the slowest to recover. That's why any plan I support includes dedicated funding for rural projects, technical assistance for small towns, and a commitment to local hiring. We can't build a stronger country by leaving anyone behind. She paused, letting the committee absorb her words. This isn't about red states or blue states. It's about making sure every American has access to safe roads, clean water, and reliable power, no matter where they live. The chair recognized another member, who asked Crockett to address the role of private industry. How do you see the partnership between government and business in building climate-resilient infrastructure? Crockett responded, public-private partnerships can be powerful, but only if they're structured to serve the public good. That means clear standards, strong oversight, and a focus on long-term value, not just short-term profits. We need to make sure that private investment complements, not replaces, public responsibility. And we have to guard against the kind of cost-cutting that leads to shoddy work and unsafe outcomes. She cited examples from Pennsylvania and Texas, where private contractors had failed to deliver on infrastructure projects, costing taxpayers millions and leaving communities worse off. We can't afford to repeat those mistakes. The stakes are too high. As the hearing neared its end, the mood in the room had changed. What began as a challenge to climate spending had become a masterclass in how to connect policy to people's real lives. Crockett had not only answered every question, she had anticipated them, reframed them, and turned them into opportunities to build consensus. Fetterman, for his part, seemed to recognize that he had underestimated his opponent. He offered a grudging nod of respect. Congresswoman Crockett, I may not agree with everything you've said, but I can't argue with your preparation or your commitment to the people you serve. Crockett smiled, her tone gracious but resolute. That's all any of us can ask for, Senator. To show up, do the work, and fight for the people who sent us here. The hearing adjourned, but the impact lingered. Reporters rushed to file their stories, and social media lit up with praise for Crockett's performance. Clips of her dismantling the false choice between climate action and working-class needs went viral, sparking new conversations about what real leadership looks like in a time of crisis. In the days that followed, lawmakers from both parties reached out to Crockett's office, asking for her input on infrastructure and climate policy. Community leaders in Pennsylvania and beyond cited her testimony as a turning point, a moment when the debate shifted from fear and division to hope and possibility. The ripple effect of Crockett's testimony didn't stop at the committee room doors. In Pennsylvania, local news outlets replayed her exchange with Fetterman, sparking town hall debates and op-eds about the real meaning of working-class values. In Texas, her home state, community organizers used her words to rally support for climate-resilient infrastructure projects, reminding residents that smart investment was about protecting families, not just politics. Nationally, Crockett's performance became a case study in how to bridge the gap between policy and people. Law schools and public policy programs assigned her testimony as required viewing, challenging students to analyze not just her arguments, but her ability to connect data, empathy, and economic reality. Editorials praised her for refusing to accept the false choice between climate action and immediate needs, and for exposing how that narrative had been used for decades to delay progress and protect special interests. Fetterman, for his part, faced tough questions from his own constituents. Some appreciated his skepticism, but many more demanded to know why he had framed the debate as a zero-sum game. Town hall attendees asked him to explain why he hadn't championed climate adaptation as a way to create jobs and protect communities. The senator, to his credit, acknowledged that the conversation had changed. "We can't keep doing things the old way," he admitted at a press conference. "We have to listen, learn, and adapt." Crockett, meanwhile, continued her work, meeting with union leaders, small business owners, and local officials to turn her committee testimony into real-world results. She pushed for legislation that would prioritize climate-resilient projects in the most vulnerable communities, ensure transparency in spending, and guarantee that the jobs created would go to local workers. Her approach was pragmatic, inclusive, and relentlessly focused on outcomes.